A heavy silence gripped the Dreadfang's bridge. The Vorlak crew, warriors who had never known defeat, sat frozen in their seats. The human warship hovered behind them, glowing red like a burning ember. It had spoken. It had judged them. And now, it was waiting. Commander Zycon swallowed his rage. Fear was what it wanted. He would not give it that. "Open a channel," he growled. An officer hesitated. "Commander, are you sure?" "Do it." The comms crackled as the channel opened. Zycon stood, towering, forcing strength into his voice. "This is Commander Zycon of the Vorlak Empire. Identify yourself." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, "We are what remains." The voice was distorted, mechanical, but there was something deeper beneath it. Something old. "We are the forgotten. The hunted. The ghosts of your war." Zycon's claws curled. Impossible. Humans were gone. Their fleets were destroyed. Their planets burned. The Vorlak had erased them from history. And yet, this warship stood before them. "We do not fear ghosts," Zycon spat. The human warship moved. Not forward, not backward, but everywhere at once. It blinked across the void, appearing on the Dreadfang's flank, then above, then below. Impossible speed. It was toying with them. Then it fired. Not at the bridge. Not at the weapons. At the escape pods. One by one, they exploded, their emergency lights vanishing into the darkness. The message was clear. There would be no surrender, no retreat. Zycon felt his chest tighten. "Commander," a voice whispered. It was one of his officers, a hardened soldier. His voice shook. They're not letting us leave." Zycon's mind raced. He had never encountered a warship like this. No empire, no species, no fleet in the known galaxy had ever wielded such power. But there was one truth he knew, one law of the universe. Everything can be destroyed. He straightened. His fear turned to fire. If this was their final battle, so be it. "Prepare the core disruptor," he ordered. The crew stared. "Commander, that weapon is unstable. If we fire, it will destroy us," Zycon said. His voice was cold. "And it will destroy them." A heavy silence. Then, slowly, his officers nodded. The final weapon of the Dreadfang, a planet cracker, meant to burn entire worlds to ash, began to charge. The human warship stopped moving. For the first time, it hesitated. Zycon bared his fangs. "Now you know fear." The disruptor reached full charge. Energy crackled across the ship's core, growing, building, ready to unleash a star-killing blast. The bridge lights flickered. The countdown began. 3. The human warship's red glow pulsed. 2. Zycon allowed himself a smirk. 1. Then, the human warship disappeared. Vanished. Like a shadow fleeing from the sun. The sensors blinked. Where did it go? Nothing. No trace. The void was empty. The ship was gone. A chilling thought crawled into Zycon's mind. It was never afraid. It had only left because it had chosen to. And worse, it would be back. The Dreadfang's bridge was eerily quiet, except for the crackling of damaged circuits and the heavy breathing of the crew. The human warship had disappeared, but its presence still loomed over them like a shadow. Commander Zycon gritted his teeth. His ship, a Vorlak battlecruiser, was supposed to be unstoppable. But in just minutes, this human vessel had pierced their shields, breached their hull, and then vanished like a ghost. "This is impossible," one officer muttered, eyes locked on the scanners. "No ship moves like that. No ship disappears like that." "It didn't disappear," Zycon growled. "It's still here. Somewhere." He turned to the weapons officer. "Fire blind. Sweep the area with disruptors. I want to light up every inch of space." The Dreadfang's cannons roared to life. Beams of energy blasted outward in all directions, burning through the void. If the human ship was cloaked, If it was hiding in some unseen layer of space, this would flush it out. But the sensors remained empty. No impact, no movement, nothing. Zykon's claws tightened. Where was it? Then, the lights flickered. A cold shiver ran through the crew. Power fluctuations, an engineer reported. Something is. The ship shook violently. Boom. Explosions erupted deep within the Dreadfang. Screens shattered, sparks rained from the ceiling, and a piercing alarm howled through the ship. Direct hit, inside the ship. Zykon's eyes widened. Inside. How? And then came the worst news. Commander, the sensors officer whispered, his voice barely audible. The human warship. It's right behind us. Zykon spun to the main screen. There it was. The human warship, glowing red like the embers of a dying star, floating just meters from the Dreadfang's engines. It had moved in without a sound, without a trace. It had been watching them the entire time. How did it? One officer began, but before he could finish, the warship fired. A beam of pure red energy sliced through space, hitting the Dreadfang's rear thrusters. The blast ripped through the ship, sending chunks of armor spinning into the void. The battlecruiser lurched forward, spinning wildly. Crew members were thrown from their stations as gravity flickered on and off. We're losing control. Zykon gripped the armrest of his chair. His mind raced. This wasn't just a warship. This was something more. Something deadlier than any human fleet they had ever faced. His voice was low, filled with cold realization. This is no ordinary enemy. This is a hunter. And they were the prey. The Vorlek battlecruiser Dreadfang hovered in the cold void of space, its weapons locked onto the human warship. The red glow from the enemy vessel flickered like an ancient beast waking from a long sleep. It made no transmissions, no attempt to communicate. It simply existed, and that was terrifying enough. Commander Zykon stood frozen, his 4 red eyes fixed on the screen. His claws dug into the metal armrest of his command chair. The humans were supposed to be extinct. The Vorlek Empire had destroyed Earth centuries ago, crushing their fleets, burning their cities. And yet here it was, a human warship, alive, armed, watching. Status report. Zykon barked. A crew member's voice trembled. Their weapons are active, but they are not charging. They are testing us, Zykon muttered. He had seen this before. Predators in the wild did the same. They watched, measured, waited before they struck. He would not allow it. Send another transmission, he ordered. Demand identification. If they refuse, we fire. The signal pulsed into the void, reaching the silent warship. The bridge crew waited, eyes locked onto the screen. Seconds passed, then minutes. No response. But something did change. The ship's red lights intensified, glowing brighter, pulsing like a beating heart. And then, it moved. It was fast. Too fast. Commander, the warship is accelerating. It's heading straight for us. Zykon snapped into action. Fire. Now. The Dreadfang unleashed its full power. Plasma cannons lit up the darkness, sending wave after wave of destructive energy toward the human warship. Missiles launched, engines roared, and the void became a battlefield of fire. Direct hits. Explosions tore through the human warship's hull, sending debris flying in all directions. Smoke and flames erupted from its surface. Zykon exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. Too easy. Then the impossible happened. The flames died. The smoke cleared. And the warship was still there. Untouched, unbroken. It had taken the full force of their attack and remained standing. A cold dread spread through the bridge. No ship could survive such an assault. No ship should. And yet, this one did. Then, for the first time, the human warship responded. It powered up its weapons. Red energy crackled across its hull, charging, humming with terrifying power. Commander, an officer whispered, his voice shaking. It's returning fire. Zykon's claws tightened. He had fought many wars. He had seen death. But as the first red blast erupted from a human warship, tearing through space like a sword slicing flesh, he realized one thing. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something else. And they were not ready for it. The Dreadfang floated in the silent void, its core disruptor humming with unstable energy. The bridge was filled with the flickering glow of emergency lights. The human warship was gone. Commander Zykon stared at the empty space before him, his claws tightening into fists. His mind refused to accept it. No ship moves like that. No species fights like that. And yet, the impossible had just happened. "Commander," an officer whispered, "do we fire the disruptor?" Zykon didn't answer. His plan had been to unleash the planet cracker, to reduce the enemy to atoms, even if it meant sacrificing himself and his crew. But now, there was nothing to fire at. The enemy had simply left. Not defeated, not destroyed, just gone. Zykon felt a deep burning rage fill his chest. "They let us live," he growled. His voice was low, dangerous. "They had us, and they let us live." A silence settled over the bridge. And then a realization, one far worse than death, crawled into his mind. They weren't finished. This warship, this phantom of vengeance, had tested them. It had hunted them, but it hadn't struck the killing blow. Why? A cold, mechanical voice echoed through his head. "You have hunted many. Now, you are hunted." Zykon straightened. He turned to his officers, his warriors, the elite of the Vorlak Empire. "They're watching us," he said. His voice was sharp, cutting through the fear. "They're studying us. This was never about this battle. It was never about this ship." He took a slow breath, his eyes burning with a new understanding. "They wanted us to know." The crew shifted uncomfortably. "Know what, Commander?" someone finally asked. Zykon turned toward the viewport, staring into the vast emptiness of space. "That humans are not extinct." The words hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. "They survived," Zykon continued, his voice dark with certainty. "They have ships, they have weapons, and if they have this," his claws dug into the armrest, "then they are stronger than ever." The weight of his words settled over the crew. For centuries, the Vorlak Empire had ruled the stars. They had won, or so they had thought. Now, for the first time in history, they were the ones being hunted. Zykon turned to his crew. "Prepare for warp. We return to the homeworld immediately." An officer hesitated. "Commander, what do we tell the Emperor?" Zykon's eyes darkened. "Tell him." He exhaled slowly. "Tell him the war isn't over. Somewhere, out in the black, humanity still lived. And they were coming." The Vorlak battlecruiser Dreadfang floated in the darkness of space, its massive form covered in thick, black armor. It was one of the most feared warships in the galaxy, a predator that had destroyed countless enemies. Commander Zykon stood on the bridge, his 4 red eyes scanning the glowing screens. His sharp claws tapped against the control panel as his crew worked in silence. The Vorlak Empire was at war with many species, but tonight, the patrol was quiet. No enemies had dared to approach this sector. Then, without warning, the alarm screamed. "Commander," a crew member shouted. "Unidentified warship detected." It appeared out of nowhere. Zykon's eyes narrowed. "Impossible. No ship can just appear." The main screen flickered, showing a dark, silent warship moving through the void. It was massive, shaped like a jagged spear, its surface covered in heavy plating. It had no energy signals, no transmission codes, just pure silence. "Run a full scan," Zykon ordered. The crew's claws moved across the controls, analyzing the strange vessel. A few seconds passed before a robotic voice echoed across the bridge. "Warning. Human warship detected." For a moment, silence filled the room. Then a nervous whisper spread among the crew. "Human," one officer muttered. "That's not possible. They were destroyed long ago. Zyklon clenched his jaw. Humans, the one species that had defied the Vorlek Empire, the one species that had nearly ended their reign of terror, but that was centuries ago. The Empire had wiped them out, or so they believed. "Confirm the scan," Zyklon ordered. His voice was calm, but inside, his mind was racing. A second scan ran. The results were the same. Human warship, active, armed. Zyklon took a deep breath. This was no ghost. This was real. "Open a transmission," he commanded. A crew member tapped a few buttons. No response. "Send a warning. If they do not answer, we destroy them." The Vorlak battleship Dreadfang sent out a powerful energy signal. Any intelligent species would respond, but the human warship remained silent. Then the ship did something strange. It changed course. Instead of running, instead of hailing back, it began moving straight toward them. The crew tensed. This was not normal. Most enemies either tried to communicate or fled. But this ship, it advanced like a predator stalking its prey. "Commander," one officer whispered. What? What if it's not just a ship? What if it's something else?" Zyklon's claws tightened. The Vorlek Empire had fought many enemies, but none had ever acted like this. "Prepare all weapons," he ordered. "If they want to fight, we will give them one." The ship came closer, still silent, still watching. And then, the lights on the human warship flickered on. A deep red glow spread across its surface, like a monster awakening from a long sleep. Zyklon felt something he had not felt in many years. The Dreadfang spun helplessly in space, its thrusters crippled, its crew struggling to regain control. The human warship remained behind them, watching, waiting. Commander Zyklon gripped the armrests of his chair, his claws digging into the metal. His ship was one of the most powerful in the Vorlek fleet. It had conquered entire star systems, and yet, in mere minutes, this single warship had torn through them like they were nothing. The alarms screamed. Decks 12 through 15 were exposed to space. Engines at 30% power, shields barely holding. This wasn't a battle. It was a hunt. "Status report." Zyklon barked. "Thrusters failing. Weapons offline. Life support unstable." An officer responded, struggling to keep his voice steady. "Commander, if we take another hit." "We won't take another hit," Zyklon snapped. But he knew the truth. They were trapped. If the human warship wanted, it could finish them right now. And yet, it didn't. It just hovered behind them, glowing red like an omen of death. Zyklon's mind raced. Why isn't it finishing us? Then realization struck him like a bolt of lightning. "It's testing us," he muttered. The bridge crew turned to him. "It had us from the start." Zyklon continued, his voice tight with anger. "It could have destroyed us in seconds, but it didn't. It let us fight back. It let us see its power." "Why?" one officer whispered. Zyklon clenched his jaw. "Because it wants us to be afraid." A heavy silence filled the bridge. Fear, that was the true weapon. This warship wasn't just fighting them. It was breaking them. And it was working. A deep crackling sound filled the air. At first, it seemed like static. But then, a voice. Cold, mechanical, unnatural. "Vorlek vessel. Status. Compromised." The crew froze. The human warship was speaking to them. The voice was flat, emotionless. "Your species. Conquerors. Executioners. Destroyers of worlds." Zyklon felt his blood run cold. "It knows what we did." The voice continued. "You have hunted many. Now, you are hunted." The crew exchanged panicked glances. "Commander," an officer whispered, his voice shaking. "What? What kind of warship is this?" Zyklon didn't answer, because deep down, he already knew. This was not just a human ship. This was vengeance. And it had come for them. The bridge of the Dreadfang was silent, except for the growing hum of energy from the human warship. The red glow on its hull pulsed like a living heart, growing brighter, stronger. Commander Zycon felt a rare sensation crawl up his spine. Fear. Brace for impact, he roared. The human warship fired. A single blinding red beam erupted from its front, cutting through the darkness like a blade of pure destruction. It moved too fast, too precise. The Dreadfang's shields flared as they took the hit, but something was wrong. The energy didn't disperse like normal weapons. Instead, it burrowed into the shields, twisting, tearing through them like they were nothing but mist. Shields down to 30%. An officer shouted. That was just one shot. Before Zycon could react, a second shot fired. This one struck the left side of the ship. Boom! The explosion rocked the Dreadfang, sending crew members flying across the bridge. The lights flickered, alarms screamed, and a thick cloud of smoke spread through the air. Direct hit. Hull breach on decks 7 through 9. Zycon's claws dug into the armrest of his command chair. How? How was this possible? No weapon should be able to cut through Vorlak armor like that. It had taken centuries for their empire to perfect it. And yet this ship, this human warship, was tearing through them with ease. He forced himself to stay calm. Return fire. Use everything we have. The Dreadfang unleashed hell. Plasma cannons, missiles, disruptors. Every weapon fired at once. The void burned with blue and green energy, all racing toward the human warship. Impact. Direct hits. But the warship kept moving. It weaved through the blasts with unnatural precision, its hull shimmering as if reality itself bent around it. Every missile that came close exploded before touching it, as if the ship had an invisible barrier. This isn't normal, one officer whispered. This ship, it's not just human. Zycon's jaw tightened. What are you saying? The officer hesitated, then said the words no Vorlak ever wanted to hear. It's something more. Before Zycon could process that thought, the human warship vanished. One moment, it was there, glowing red, moving toward them with deadly intent. The next, it was gone. A stunned silence fell over the bridge. The crew looked at each other, confused, terrified. Did it cloak? An officer asked. Negative. The sensors officer replied, voice trembling. It's not invisible. It's just not here anymore. A cold dread filled the room. Zycon knew only one thing for sure. This battle wasn't over. It was just beginning.